Good morning. Ayin Beis, volume 3. We're on middle of page 1411. So the Rebbe Rashab, in a progressive way, explained the term in the chapter of Hazinu, Pashas Hazinu, where the Jewish people, Yichelek Hashem Amei, a portion of God, what they're called, Ishen Einei, the pupil of his eye. What's the analogy of the pupil of his eye? And explained it briefly, started on page 1408, in context of everything we've been talking about, the eye being the power that allows us to see, power of vision, power that channels light. Essentially, you can say in the human being, the primary sense or the primary faculty that experiences light is the eye, because the eye with light is able to see everything around it. The difference is between the physical eye, where it has limitations, it cannot see in the dark, it can only see that far, so it needs a siyua, the support of an outside light, sunlight, candlelight, or spiritually speaking, Torah light, the guiding light of Torah to illuminate the darkness of this world. But then there's the level of the source of the etzem koyach hariyah. There's the power of vision itself, where it's unfettered and unlimited within the soul. And there it doesn't have those limits. That's the soul as it is higher than Torah and higher than the light in a way, because it itself is a illuminating force. So that is the higher level. So in explaining that, he began to speak about Ishen Einai, how they are the pupil of the eye, which is, of course, a very high level, higher than, by contrast, when we call the angels, Einei Hashem, the eyes of God, or sometimes called the seven eyes, the seven levels. That's the malachim, they are the interfaces of the flow that sustains existence. And that flow goes through a whole series of gradations and levels and gets thicker as it goes from a more spiritual and ethereal state to a more defined physical state. It also refers to this level of the Sanhedrin, which is Einei Ha'eda, the eyes of the people. But it's the 70 Sanhedrin, so it's 70 as they are relate to the people, as we learned. And they are like the Skenim, the Isfula, when he says Asfale, the 70 sages, gather them, and or Maitzil, Vatsalti min Ruach, God imparted from the spirit of Moshe upon them, so they can then guide and they can direct the people more commensurate to their level. And then there's the neshamas, which she relates to the level of Moshe Rabbeinu, Mufla Shebes Sanhedrin, the distinguished chief justice of the Sanhedrin, that's above them, and that's Chochma itself. Etzem Primis Chochma, all the way to Chochma, Stima'ah, and Arich, and the highest, as we learned yesterday, in Chochma of Atik. That's talking about Chochma of Atik, the eye that the Idra Rabbah says at the bottom of page 1410, the eye that is the Seichel Mufla of Atik, and that, of course, is the higher level. That's completely beyond, and that's Ishen Einei, the pupil of the eye. The eye itself is Chochma, and Ishen Einei is Primis Etzem Chochma, the inner dimension of Chochma, like we discussed, the clarity or the vision or the resonance, the experience of something higher than existence. And how we concluded, that's like the level of Meschusa, not Schus Talia Milsa, but Memazla Talia Milsa. The mazel, which comes from Chochma Stima'ah, Chochma Shabikeser, and that comes, and that's where Banei Chaim Zena are dependent on the mazel. And how do we draw from there? So he concluded that we do through the mazel of the neshama, the makif of the neshama, not the primi, not nefesh ruach neshama, but chaya and even yechida perhaps, and well, even higher than that, because the neshama, as we said, even rooted higher than yechida, higher in yachid. And that's the Avodah Shalamayla Mitam V'das. So one line he just said about Avodah, but she's now going to elaborate upon. And that sums up what we learned in the middle of page 1411. Like he began on page 1408, he says, what is this in Avodah? So right now, we just learned yesterday, Avodah Shalamayla Mitam V'das. So we know in Avodah itself, there's a rational Avodah, there's Avodah with Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, where you're using Nehi, whether it's behavioral or the more the behavioral faculties like Netzach Yesod, or Ruach, emotional faculties, Ava, V'yira, love, reverence, and so on, and Teferes, which is to gaze at the grandeur of godliness, the beauty as beauty. Then there's Chabad, Neshama, which is using our minds to contemplate and understand what God, everything about God. And then there's the Koches Makifim, that's Lamayla Metam V'das. And that's the higher levels of the Neshama, where we're accessing realities that are beyond our rational or our defined structures. And that's the Avodah that he briefly says is what draws down from this higher level of Ishen Einoi, the pupil of the eye. Okay, so that's a brief summary, and I'm ready to continue now. Let's the new paragraph on page 1411. So, as I said, the paragraphs were constructed by the publisher, not by the Rebbe Rashab himself. So some of the paragraphs, you can question whether there's just a flow from the previous paragraph, but regardless, this continues where we left off. Avodah Shalamayel Mitam V'das. So the new paragraph on page 1411, and the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Ready to go? Does anybody have any questions about what we've learned till now? So now he's going to explain this now. What exactly is this Avodah that accesses this level, which, as always, is going to definitely crystallize and make clear the whole concept, because it won't just be a level. We're now going to understand what is our work in accessing this deeper level, this higher level. So Rebbe Rashab says now like this: Obaprati is gimel mine aves yashlemer, and more specifically, this Avodah Shalamayla Mitam V'das. Well, among the three avos, and he's referring to the three avos when we say V'ahavtas Hashem Elokecha, that you shall love God. What do we say? B'chol avavcha, b'chol nafshecho, b'chol moedecha. So it's three levels of ava. It doesn't say it explicitly, but it sounds to me that's what he means by the gimel mine avos. Even though there are many different levels of ava. For example, you have ava zuta, ava elam, ava selam, ava rabba, ava b'tainugim. Sometimes they're referred to the three levels of Ava, but here I believe he's referring to B'chol Nafshech, B'chol Vavcha, B'chol Nafshech, B'chol Medech. So he says, what we just said, the Avodah of accessing that which is Ishen Einoi, which means we're talking now not Chochma as a manifest in intelligence in understanding something, which is conscious Chochma, but super conscious Chochma in Arich, and even higher in Atik, which he calls the Makif Shebe Nefesh. And that's Avodah Shalamayla Mitam V'das, like Kabbalah Sel, for example. That's Avodah that's not defined by rational, defined by going outside of your rational understanding. Like we've spoken many times, that intelligence is ultimately not about knowledge, and intelligence is about experiencing something transcendent and higher than us. She says more specifically, in the three Minna Avis, in the three types of love, Yesh Lemer, that this Avodah we're talking about here is the Avodah of Alidei Mesiras Nefesh, the B'chol Nafshecho. So b'chol avavcha means with all your heart, which really means with both sides of the heart, b'shnei yitzarecha, the right side, the left side. B'chol nafshecha means with all your soul. So this refers to a level of Mesiras Nefesh. As we're going to say, the Gemara says, he's going to bring it in a moment, that what means b'chol nafshecha? That even if you're a nightless nafshecha, even if you had to give away your soul, you're ready to do so. So Nafshecho refers to Mesiras Nefesh. And B'chol Moedecha is another level which we're not discussing right now, but he will discuss later. So he's saying, Yesh Lema, that this Avodah that we're talking about is through the Mesiras Nefesh of B'chol Nafshecho. And he's now going to explain what that means. So but before we go there, just again to reiterate, in Avodas Hashem, there's an Avodah that we do with our logic, with our minds, with our emotions, and there's things we do by our submission through our bittul and giving ourselves up and submitting ourselves, suspending ourselves to something greater than ourselves. And that usually refers to Kabbalah Sel, Mesiras Nefesh. If you may recall back when we spoke about Mutfa, Murgish, Muskel, so we talked about this level of going to a level that is beyond. You first start with your behavioral and reflexive emotions, and from there you move to more mature emotions And then from there, you move to the highest level of muskal, that you go beyond the subjective emotional, and you enter into the world of the mind that takes you into realities that are greater than your needs, and ultimately even to gazing at arich and atik. All this we learned much earlier, that there's the higher levels of Avodah, and there he spoke a lot about b'chol meidecha, and he spoke about b'chol vavcha, b'chol nafshecho, as well as Mesiras Nefesh. So this is definitely connecting us back to those topics. I'll cite them when we need it, but I just refresh our memories. This idea of going outside of ourselves, beyond ourselves, is ultimately what Mesiras Nefesh is. So, for instance, in many cases, you'll find that people are very committed to their philosophies or their schools of thought, but you don't see them going and giving their life for it. The concept of Mesiras Nefesh actually is seen by some as being non-intellectual. You know, you ever see a Shakespeare scholar who's ready to die Shakespeare, or some other scholar? Oh, Mesiras Nefesh is only when you have a God. That it's not just that you value the scholarship, but you value the God behind it, and you're ready to give your life. It's more than just, we dance with the Torah. We don't just study Torah. And other expressions that are like we do for someone we love. It's not just a knowledge, a school of thought. So there's the Mesiras Nefesh. He's now going to explain what that means. Dehine, because now, Be'emek HaMelech. So Be'emek HaMelech is a classic sefer of Kabbalah, actually from the Kabbalah, not of Rabbi Chaim Vital, of Rabbi Yisrael Sarug, of Emek HaMelech. The author is Bachrach, not Mordechai, Bachrach is the name of the author. But Chassidus cites it quite often, Emek HaMelech, Shar Elam Ateyu, Perek Samach Vav, Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Dalet. So the Emek HaMelech, in the Shar, it's called the Shar, the gate of the world of Teyu, chapter 66, and he even cites the page 37, Amud Dalet, D, 37D. So there, he writes, Al-Dvar, Lamazayin Amud Dalet, Kosav. He writes, Bepirish HaMishnah, the Perek tells the Brachas. In explaining the Mishnah in the 9th chapter of Brachas, so what does the Mishnah say on B'chol Nafshecho? Afiluhu neitlas Nafshecho. The Mishnah says what it means B'chol Nafshecho. What does it add? When you already say to love God B'chol Levavcha with all your heart, what does B'chol Nafshecho add? With all your soul. So the Gemara, the Mishnah says it means Afiluhu neitlas Nafshecho. Even if he takes your Nefesh, to that extent, that's how much you love him. You're ready to give allow your Nefesh to be taken. So B'chol Levavcha says, I love God with all my heart, but we don't know what would happen if it was a matter of life and death, so to speak. How committed are you? So the Mishnah says, Afilu neitlas nafshech. So now the Emek HaMelech explains what's the word hu neitlas nafshech. Hu, remember in Hebrew every word is precise in Torah. Hu means lashon nister, he. Ata means lashon nechach, revealed. Ata, you. Hu means he. Remember, we learned before who bezdine. So that's clearly what he's continuing that theme. That's why I felt that this paragraph is really a continuation of the previous one. But it continues. So he's going to say, so the Emek HaMelech interprets what's who neitlas nafshe, who's the who? Says who dafke. Loshen nister. Who? In the third person. Which means, third person, when you say someone, he said, when you say you said, it's like you're talking to someone who you're looking at. You're saying, you said to me, you told me. When you say he said, you're talking about someone that is the third person, that is in the Hebrew we call lashon nister, like he's concealed. It's referring to a concealed level. And what level is that? Shahu Binah alma diskasya. So the who is referring to the level of Binah, and Binah is considered the world of the hidden worlds. We know there's a difference between alma disgalia and alma diskasya. Just briefly, what's the difference? The revealed worlds is usually refers to the mides, because they're revealed emotions, so they're expressing and they have a relationship with another. Or it's sometimes dibur, speech, is revealed. We hear the speech. Thought, on the other hand, is thought to yourself. Others don't see it. So it's nister. It's concealed from others. And that's the level of Binah, the mother that gives birth to the midas. And that refers to the hidden worlds. Sometimes the hidden worlds is like the world of water, and the revealed worlds is the world of land. Yam Yabosha. So this is a long discussions about Moshe Rabbeinu min hamayim mishisihu, that Moshe came from the level of water, from the level of thought, and entered into the world of land. So ultimately, we want to bridge the two. By Kriyas Yamsuf was the bridging Hafich Yam Liyabosha, that the water was turned into land. But in our context, we're talking about Binah, which would be Alma Diskasya, and Mides would be Alma Disgalia. So we say who? Neitlas Nafshecho. So the Emek HaMelech continues to explain who is the level of Binah, the hidden worlds, and what's the context here? What does it mean, Neitlas Nafshecho? The Binah Neitelas Neshamas HaTzadikim, because Binah takes, or Neitla means to take, but they take the souls and elevate the souls of Tzadikim, Lalis Imam Lemachshava El Yena, to elevate with them to the higher machshava, to the supernal thought. That's what Binah does. So, in spiritual context, it means that tzaddikim are lifted up by Binah to the higher hidden worlds from their particular level. That means neitlas nafshecha. So neitlas neshamas tzaddikim. Who neitlas nafshecha? Means that even if he, meaning Binah, al-mediskasya, takes this as nafshecha, your soul, the soul of the tzaddik, to elevate to machshava el yena. And the Rebbe Rashab interprets what means machshava el yena now. Because the Emek HaMelech is written in Kabbalistic language. It's very brief. Just states machshava el yena. But what does machshava el yena mean? So he's going to explain now in this parentheses, which is not a short parentheses, around 15 lines, 9 lines. He's going to explain what means machshava el yena. But let me go after the parentheses. I just want to read the end of the Emek HaMelech, so we'll understand the full context. Then we'll go back to the parentheses. So if you go down 9 lines, by de halah zu, the Emek HaMelech continues, and through this elevation of Binah, elevating the neshamas to machshava el yena, through this elevation, mamshichim, it draws down sheyeh yichud yudkei. There should be the unification, the unity of yudkei, which is Chochma and Binah. Yud is Chochma, Hey is Binah. So it's the full unification of yudkei, yichuda shlim, the complete union. Remember the bottom of last page, zivuga shlim, that he's brought from the Erachama. He brought that this higher level, which creates neshamas, gives birth to new neshamas, to a hilid neshamas, is primius atzmus chachma. So basically, it's drawing them up to machshava yena. We're now going to learn what level that is in context of everything we've learned here, and it draws it down. And it draws it mamshichim. We draw from that, not down. He says mamshichim. We draw the yichud yudke, which is a yichud shlim, is a complete union, and that's b'chol nafshecha. That's what it comes to add. So now ad kan dvorov. So sometimes you'll see the language ad kan l'shene, which is when he's quoting the exact citation. So he'll say ad kan l'shene, like we learned earlier on the previous page. But so ad kan dvorov means it's not the exact language, but it's ad kan dvorov up till here. That's the content. He's summarizing what the Emek HaMelech says. So that's the Emek HaMelech in B'chol Nafshecha. In other words, before we learn the Avodah of it, he's first explaining what this level of B'chol Nafshecha is. So now, back to the parentheses. So what is this level of machshava el yena? And now we'll see how it comes together with everything we've learned till now. So I'm going back to the parentheses now. Hainu, b'chinas meiches Stima'ah. So Binah takes the neshamas, lalis imam, to elevate with them to machshava el yena. So Binah is like carrying the neshamas with it to what level? The level of meiches Stima'ah, which is superconscious wisdom, the superconscious mind in Keser. Shazau Ika B'chinas Hu, where that's the primary level of Hu. So even though Hu manifests also in the spheres, Binah compared to Zoh, to the Midas, as I said, is a Lashon Nister, is concealed, like thought is concealed from speech. But now Binah is the channel, you can say, that carries the souls and carries it up to where? To the ultimate Hu. The Iker Hu is what? is Chochma Stima'ah, because that's really Stima'ah. Talk about Nister. So again, you see here the relativity theory is necessary. Everything is relative. Binah compared to Midas is who, but compared to Chochma Stima'ah is the Ikar of who, and that's where this is all being elevated to. The Neshamas are being elevated to the level of who. Like he writes in Idra Zuta is another part of Zayar. We learned before Idra Rabba. Idra Rabba means the great assembly or the great gathering or the great group. And because it was the 10 students of Rashbi, that's Zayar Pasha Nosei. And in Zayar Pasha Azinu, there's a Idra Zuta, because 3 of them had passed away in between. And that's where we read about Rashbi's passing. It's called Idra Zuta. It's Zayar and Pasha Azinu. There on page 290a, he says that who is Meiches Stima'ah. So even though the Emek HaMelech interprets who as who Neitlas Nafshecho Binah, but is elevating it to Machshava Yena, like we learned before, who Bez Dineh, what we say? Bez Dineh is Sanhedrin. And who, we said, was the level of Mufla. Chochma Atik. Yeah. As Dina I Sanhedrin, can you that connect Mashalmatu Mufla Shabinhedrin? Right. The Hashgach of who Atzmei. Okay. So now the Rebbe Rashab is going to say, so what's that? Umasha Aliyah. Binah. The Emek HaMelech says that this doesn't just elevate to Meiches Stima'ah. The Aliyah comes through Binah. That's how the Emek HaMelech explains it. Who Neitlas Nafshecho, that who Binah elevates. So that why is the Aliyah through Binah? Yesh Leimer. So the Emek HaMelech doesn't say. The Rebbe Rashab is explaining now in Emek HaMelech. The Emek HaMelech. Yesh Leimer shezeu ki'inyan bechinas u'bechol moedecha shehu bebinah. That's like the level of B'chol Meidecha. Remember we said B'chol Levavcha, B'chol Nafshecha, B'chol Meidecha. So B'chol Meidecha is the highest level of the Ava, of love, with all your might, or with all your Ma'oid. When you say Toiv Ma'oid, not just Toiv, it's good, it's very good, with all your with all of you, even beyond your regular faculties. So he says that is Shehu B'Binah. That's why he says that it's through Binah, because Binah is that power. What he means by this is that when you love someone, let's start with a simple example. So love, we know, is in the level of Ava, is Chesed. It's not Binah, it's Chesed. It's a very power. It could be a very powerful love, and it can even be B'chol Levavcha, with all your heart, which means that all of you, it's not just a superficial love. Your entire heart is consumed with love. But Binah adds something to it. Now he's interpreting Binah. You'll see in a minute that he's going to explain that here we're talking B'chol Nafshecha. The next line. But let's first talk about it in simple. So then there comes another level where you're not just loving with all your heart. The love is now also assuming and receiving a higher power from the hidden powers of Binah, which means the love is coming from a deeper level. So generally speaking, that we call B'chol Meidecha, or Commission is barely ill. Like we learned earlier, remember I referred to, I could tell you the page, on page 1243. So we're talking about a good 160 pages back. That's where he spoke about Binah being the level of B'chol Meidecha. Ach kan mavur, however, here we're explaining it, Shezeu b'chinas B'chol Nafshecha, that this is the level of B'chol Nafshecha. Okay, let me just explain this not to confuse anyone. I know many times questions are asked like this. In Chassidus, in general in Torah, very often you talk about one level and then you say elsewhere it talks about it in a different way. So generally speaking, B'chol Meidecha associates with Binah. And that we learned earlier on page, as I said, 1243 and on. But here, the Emek HaMelech is interpreting Binah and B'chol Nafshecha. So why is the Rebbe Rashab bring B'chol Meidecha? Because he wants to cite and explain why you need Binah. When you learn other Maimarim, other places where it talks about how Binah is B'chol Meidecha, you understand that Binah adds an intensity to the love that Chesed itself doesn't have. However, when you break it down, like here, he's talking about it as B'chol Nafshecho. B'chol Meidecha would be even a higher level than that, which I do think we're going to talk about. But right now, he's not talking B'chol Meidecha. He's just bringing it to give to demonstrate how it's explained in places that this is a higher level than just regular love. And that's why you need Binah, because Binah is this level, B'chol Meidecha, like we learned earlier. Here it explains that it's the level of B'chol Nafshecho. And B'chol Meidecha would be even higher than that. Okay.
I'm sorry, I did not follow that. Are you saying that the level of B'chol Meidecha is mashpia on the level of...
No, I did not say that at all. I said that you have many places, something will be explained in one way, and other places explains it a different way. And it's perfectly fine. This is not this is levels of Ruchnius. As I explained, Tehirei law, we explained on many levels. Neshamas are explained on many levels. So this too, the concept of Binah, of sometimes refers to B'chol Meidecha, like we learned earlier. And here he's talking about it that refers to B'chol Nafshecho. And B'chol Meidecha would be higher, but he's citing it to explain the idea that Binah has that power that adds another dimension to the V'ahavta. That's all I said.
No, okay. So, but then why does he bother to mention? Why does he bother to mention B'chol Meidecha at all?
I just explained, because when you cite other places, you can understand from there, when you learn there, the addition that Binah adds. It happens to be that there he explains it B'chol Meidecha, but when you learn there, you go back there, you'll understand why Binah has additional elements. And then here he happens to be that Binah is talking about B'chol Nafshecha, but from there you can derive and understand what Binah is contributing.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. There are two levels in B'chol Meidecha there. When we go back there, he spoke about two levels B'chol Meidecha. Back on page. Okay. So I would refer you back there, where he discusses it more at length.
Thank you.
Okay. V'yesh leimer, and we can say the Binah hi b'chinas shvi'ah. So he's continuing to explain what's Binah's particular role here. He says Binah. We also learned this earlier. I believe in volume 2, maybe also in volume 3. So it says Binah is the level of Shvi'ah, the 7th level. Because going down from the bottom up, when you count Yesod, you don't count Malchus here. So Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Tiferes, Gvura, Chesed. So Binah is the 7th level from the bottom up. So Shvi'ah Alayu, it's called. The 7th above the others. That's why it refers sometimes to Shabbos, Binah. So he says Binah is the level of Shvi'ah. Yeah, we learned this at length in volume 2, now I remember. Shezeu is Chabrus de Elyon v'Tachten. The 7th level is the connection. It joins the higher and the lower. So in other words, Chochma and higher than Chochma, you're already going into the realm that is beginning to experience something beyond the structure of the spheres. So we've learned at length number of times that in the shtalshlus itself of the spheres, even though sometimes we say Chochma is Reishis Hagilui, the beginning of the 10 spheres, but the truth is, often it talks that Binah is really the beginning of the spheres because that's where it really starts manifesting. Chochma still is under the influence and affected by hu levade ve'ein zulosei, it senses. That's why it's koyach ma bittel. It's a spark because it's still under the effect of keser and the bittel to keser. Binah, on the other hand, the mother is the one that watches over the children. Eim habonim smecha. We learned before. Arevetz ala frechim, like the mother that hovers over its chicks, over its children. When we talk about shuluch hakan, ha'em revetzes ala frechim. So the mother is more engaged with the structure, but it's still above them. It's the mother. And the midas is the actual structure. So in that context, Binah is like an interface between the higher and the lower, because Binah is the chibur of Elyon Tach. It's the 7th when you're counting from the spheres up from the midas to Binah, and Chochma would be beyond that. So he says that's Ischabes the Elyon V'Tachten. U'kamoshon is bar le'el. Right, as we learned earlier, and this is in volume 2. I have to find it. There was a long discussion actually. Be'inyan Heichel Kodesh HaKadoshim. So he spoke there about the Heichel. The Heichel is the chamber of the Holy of Holies. So let me just explain. He explained that's the level of Binah, because Binah encompasses the Holy and the Holy of Holies. Holy and Holy of Holies is 3 levels. Kodesh HaKadoshim is Kodesh, and HaKadoshim. Kadoshim is 2, Kodesh is 1. It includes Keser, Chochma, and Binah. So Binah is essentially like I don't want to say a holding. What's the word I want to use? It's like the chamber that is an interface between the lower levels and the higher levels. And that's why in each world, the level of Kodesh Kadoshim is the level of Binah. Binah and Bria, Kodesh Kadoshim and Bria. Here he's talking Atzilus, Kodesh HaKadoshim. Shazeu is Kashrus. So what was the Holy of Holies in the Beis HaMikdash? It was an actual part of the Beis HaMikdash, but it was the highest part. The part where the Hashem, the Aron, the Ark was there, and that's where God spoke through the Ark in the Holy of Holies. But most people, but you could not enter the Holy of Holies only once a year, the high priest on Yom Kippur. But from the Holy of Holies, the voice of God, the energy flowed into Kodesh and into the outer chamber, Oyel Moed, and from there to the rest of to the people and to the whole world. So Kodesh Kadoshim is like that, is the level of Binah we learned. That's 7th level. Shezeu is Kashrus, V'Yischabrus, that is the bond, the connection, V'Yischabrus, and the joining, Ta'atachten Ba'elyon, of the lower into the higher. Now remember, Ayin Beis is all about interface. Every interface plays another role. So it's not so don't be confused the fact that different places we're talking about different parts of the interface. Here we're talking about the interface between the world of emotions or the world of creation, really, because emotions relate to another relationship, connecting it to the higher level. So Binah is the in-between. And that's why Binah, the Emek HaMelech says, is neitlas Nafshecho. It elevates the neshamas all the way up to Meiches Tema. So shezeu is kashrus chabes datan by Elyon shezeu b'chinas merkava. That is the level of merkava to cause it to be a merkava, which is merkava is a vehicle that it doesn't have any identity of its own. It's a complete vehicle to that which is higher than it. Whatever rides in that chariot, the level of the merkava. That is kashrus through aliyah. And so too, so that's how Binah elevates the lower to the higher. And so too, through this will be the Hamshacha, like we learned after the parentheses, the Hamshacha, that it also draws down the energy from higher to lower. So it's a complete interface in both directions, bottom up and top down. Okay. Further explaining the Emek HaMelech, why Binah plays such a central role here. So now the Rebbe Rashab adds, let me stop if anybody wants to ask anything. Let me stop for any questions. Let's stop with that.
Is there any aspect of Chassidus applied or practical Chassidus that where you can talk about Binah in the traditional sense of understanding that if you want to elevate to these to the higher level, you have to have this understanding of the transcendence within you, and that through that understanding you can elevate higher? Or is that?
I would go back to the classes I gave on page 1243 and on, where we elaborate on it for days and days, weeks probably, and there I explained it very extensively. Here, it's just really just a. It's not tangential, it's a parenthesis, but I'd rather not go into it now. It'll just distract and won't be really helpful here, in my opinion. So if you really want more on that, I would refer you back to the classes on page, again, 1243 and on.
Is where Arach is mistakel on Atik?
No, this is at the forehead? We're talking about Binah right now. We're talking about Binah.
All right, I'll
You're
go
talking
back to
about Binah or
1243.
the staklus of Atikanar? Which one?
Wow, I was asking if they're connected in any way.
So back there, he explains it all. They are connected. But first you have to go to Binah before you get to Arachanat.
Okay.
That's why I refer. That's why I give you the pages. Commission is Bar Liel. That's where it was discussed at length. And if you recall, it was the mutfa. I already summed it up here, frankly. Mutfa, murgish, muskel. You start like the child that begins with very basic emotions, behavioral emotions, instinctive, reflexive. You grow to murgish, the emotions mature. Bina, the mother, educates and trains these midas. Then the midas reach a level of muskel, where they're the mind, that they're elevating to the level of the mind, and then to the level of Chochma, and then everything gets elevated to the highest levels. We learned this at length back then. And there I explained it in detail with the Chassidus applied as well. So I don't want to go into that right now. Let me continue teaching it, and then we'll see as it develops. Maybe I'll explain some things as we go. I want to focus on the key theme here is to keep in mind Mesiras Nefesh b'chol Nafshecho. But it is very brief here, agreed, and needs a lot of explanation. That's why I'm referring back there right now. And I'd rather first finish explaining the Emek HaMelech and seeing where he goes here, and then we'll see what we do then. Maybe I'll sum up what we learned there. So now there's another Yesh Lemer, Gam Yesh Lemer. So he already said 3 Yesh Lemers. This is going to be the 3rd. Why is the Aliyah through Binah? Because Binah is like B'chol Ma'idecha, which is here B'chol Nafshecha. And Binah is Shviyah, the interface, the connector between higher and lower. Gam Yesh Lemer could also say, Al Pi Mashakosu B'Biurei Azer Vayera Al Posik Vayas Hashem L'Sora. According to what it says in Biurei Azer, which usually refers to the Mittler Rebbe, composed a book called Biurei Azer, which is the Maimor that the Alter Rebbe said for many years. Friday nights he would explain each week the Zohar of that parsha. The Rebbe Mittler Rebbe wrote those Maimorim, and then he compiled them together and put them into a sefer called Biurei Azer. We also have Biurei Azer from the Tzemach Tzedek, where he elaborates on those Maimorim. But usually when it just says Biurei Azer, it's referring to the Mittler Rebbe. So on the Posuk, on Biurei Azer and Vayera, on the Posuk, Vayas Hashem L'Sara, he says that Hashem made for Sarah, Shagam B'chinas Mazla, that also the level of Mazel. Remember we learned in the previous paragraph, Mazel, that Bonei Chayim Mezena, the blessings of children, and life and health, and Mezena, and Parnasa, livelihood, is dependent on Mazel. And he said Mazel is Chochma Stima'ah. He says now, so in Biurei Azer he says, Shagam B'chinas Mazla, Zeu Al-Yidei Eiseres, Habezdin de Heichel Haschus. Okay, now I got it. Okay. That also Mazel is through the awakening of the Bezdin, which is in the Heichel Haschus, in the chamber of merit. So there's a chamber called Schus. Like he says, it says, Le b'schus Italia Milsa, ele b'mazl Italia Milsa. So if you recall in the previous paragraph, he brought, I had mentioned that. Let me just see the language. 1 second. Bezdine. Yeah. Bezdinem ayin saned shebe heichel haschus. So Lamaila, like in Gan Eden and higher, there is a place called the chamber of schus, merit. Now Mazel, we said, is higher than merit. Not the schus. Merit would be our merits. But he's connecting the two. And he's saying that also the level of Mazel comes through the Bezdin of Heichel Haschus. We'll soon see the connection to Binah here. Again, this is very dense and brief, but I'll explain it. Let me just continue reading. Ubahagos l'sham, and the agos to Biurei Azer. This very likely may be the Tzemach Tzedek. In the gloss to that Biurei Azer, shehu ke'inyan pischuli kechudesh al-machat, that this is like the inyan. You shall open for me like chudesh al-machat, like the eye of a needle. V'ani eftach l'cha kepischul shel heichel. And I will open for you, God says, you, below. You open up the eye of a needle, a small little space, and I will open for you the Pischei Shel Heichel, which was, or sometimes says Pischei Shel Ulam, like the door or the opening of the chamber, the Heichel of the Beis Hamikdash, or Heichel of the Kodesh Kadashim that he said, which is a very expansive and wide opening, which is explained by L'Likutei Torah Ba'abir Dani Yeshena. I have to look up what it says in L'Likutei Torah and what the Hagos are. I think the Hagos L'Sham means to be Re'azeya, but he's also referring to L'Likutei Torah, the explanation of the Maimer Ani Yeshena. V'sham, I'll explain in a moment. Let's just read it inside. V'sham, and there, in L'Likutei Torah, he says, Shezeu ke'inyan tisperu chamishim yem, you shall count 50 days, Shar Hanun, which is the 50th gate, Al Yidei Sfiras HaMemtes Yomim. So we don't count the 50th. We count through counting the 49, we achieve and reach the 50th gate. Shehein, what? Memtes Share Binah. Those are the 49 gates of Binah, which leads us to the 50th gate. Okay. So this is very dense and brief. What he's saying here is like this. Now you could add more explanation why Binah is the interface of Neitlas Nafshecho, who? That elevates the souls to the level of Chochma Stima'ah, Machshav El Yena. He's saying, so we so far have learned because it's the Heichel Kodesh Kadashim. So he brings that from Biri Hazayar. He's saying the Bezdin of Heichel Aschus most likely is the level of the 7 Midas. That's what he said earlier. But also Mazel comes through the Hesederus from that. But I'm not positive whether he means Heichel Aschus here that, or does he mean Heichel Aschus, Heichel as in Heichel Kodesh Kadashim, which is Binah. So I need to do some looking up. But I would say briefly that Heichel is referring to Binah. That's Kepiska Shel Heichel. And basically, that Binah is the level that elevates the 49 gates of Binah all the way to the 50th gate, which takes us to the higher levels that are Chochma Stima'ah and beyond. That's how I believe he's explaining this. But we have to look inside, because I'm just speaking from memory and from just what I'm reading inside here. So I will reserve the time to review this inside the sources to understand what he's adding here. He's clearly adding that Binah comes to serve this role, but I'm not sure what is what here. The level of Mazel seems to be Chochma Stima'ah. Now I think it's really that maybe is a Bezdin de Heichel Aschus, maybe Binah is the level of the Machat. Well, the overall, the point is that Binah is an interface between the lower levels and the higher levels. That's for sure the meaning here. The specific details of this Bir Azer and L'Likutei Torah, I want to look at it and then I'll get back to you maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day. But regardless, bottom line, in this parenthesis, the Rebbe Rashab explained why the Aliyah to Meiches Stima'ah is through Binah, because Binah is the interface between the lower levels and the higher levels. It's the Heichel Kodesh Kadashim, which I think is Heichel Aschus, Piska Shel Heichel.
Can you take a question?
Well, if it's to explain this last piece, I'm saying right now that I didn't explain it at all. I want to learn it inside the sources. But if it's something else, go ahead.
I think it's something else. I'm just trying to zoom out, if you will, from where we were holding in the paragraph or two before this, and the issue, the question of the Ishana Ayin, people of the eye, and how the souls are elevated, higher than even than Ha'eda, that we're connected to the highest level, Chochma Stima'ah, and that essentially is how we channel this level of godliness that enables the Neshamas Yisrael to have the shefa and to have this ability to see and participate in the operations of Elikus in the lower world. So that was a higher level. So the question here is this talking about how you get there for Neshamas Yisrael generally? Is this talking about the Mufla only? That's part one. Part two is this seems like it requires and involves a fair amount of avodah. And previously, it seemed as though it just is. It's rooted that way. There's no particular avodah that's required for those connections to exist. So those is sort of a two-part question.
Well, everything is chassidus, and everything is like that. We're all born with the soul, chelik elikam mal mamish, but you need avodah to make it active and come alive. So just because something is a certain level, that doesn't mean it's internalized or integrated. It just means that that's what we're made of. Human beings created in the divine image. Now it's our job is to reveal that and to live up to that divine image. So there's two parts here. First is establishing what level is which level. Everything has its level. So you have neshamas that are as they come down below, and the Torah guides them. Then when they climb and they go higher, the neshamas are higher than Torah and mashpia and Torah, but that's all through Avodah, that it's actualized. The levels themselves, first we began by discussing the levels. Then as I pointed out, on page 1408, he said, look at the beginning of the paragraph. I pointed out several times for this reason. Now we're going to understand the Avodah of it. What's this in Avodah? But to explain the Avodah, first he explained what Ishen Einoi is, and now at the end of the last paragraph on page 1411, he started saying this is the Avodah Shalamayla Matam V'das, and more specifically, it's the Mesiras Nefesh in the three avos of Chol Nafshecho. So we're in the middle of discussing now the Avodah, like he said, that you can have the level, but you need the Avodah to draw and reveal that level. And that's what we're in the middle of discussing that right now, what the Avodah will be to access and how we access this higher level of Ishen Einoi, the pupil of the eye, and all the levels we've been discussing here. So basically, it's like first you lay out in a good class, and a good teacher first lays out where's Chochma, where's Binah, where the Midas, Bria, Yetzirah, Asiya, Atzilus, Chochma, Stima'ah, Arich, Atik, and then comes the next step, is explaining how we travel, how we reveal these different levels, and how we access and how we actualize those levels in our lives, in reality.
Got it. Thank you. That was extremely clear. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay. So I do need to come back with you to explain the beauty of Azayar, what the Rebbe Rashab is adding. But clearly she's adding that discussion. Yeah, and more I read it, it's clear. Mazel is the level of Chochma Stima'ah, but you need Binah to get there. Okay. Remember, I'll just add this. The operative discussion is, why do you need Binah here? So first he explained because Binah is the interface. Then he's saying, if we said earlier that this is totally not in Schus, but in Mazel, so Mazel comes from Chochma Stima'ah. However, he says, even Mazel, it depends on the Seiris HaBezdin, the Heichel HaSchus. In other words, when a Bezdin, for example, finds merit in somebody, they're not just extending to him the merit and he'll be innocent and get whatever blessings he receives as a result. They also draw down the Mazel that he has. So even though Mazel is higher than Schus, but it's the Bezdin and their determination, basically saying that it's through Binah, and Binah which informs the seven Midas, which is the Sanhedrin, the Bezdin, that is through that, they say this is what draws down the Mazel of Chochma Stima'ah, which explains why the Emek HaMelech is saying that it's through Binah, who Neitles Nafshecho, that Binah elevates tzaddikim to that level of the superconscious, to Mazel. That's clear to me here right now. And that's Piskuli Kechudesh Shalmachat. When you open up a small eye of a needle, okay, so Binah opens up the eye of the needle, Kechudesh Shalmachat, the hole of the needle, and that opens up Piskei Shel Heichel, or maybe it's not Binah, maybe it's the Avodah Lamata Eshkol Heichel, and that's the 49 and 50th gate. Okay, that's the Heichel of Binah. Okay, but I'll look it up anyway for more. Just looking at it, I wanted to just say that. Okay, after the parentheses we read, I'll read it again. So after we say that through Binah, They tell us neshamas tzadikim lalis imam l'machshava el yena. I'm reading from before the parentheses. So it takes the souls and elevates them with him, with Binah, to the higher thought, the Chochma Stima'ah. And through this elevation, it's also mamshich, like we said in the parentheses, Binah is also mamshich, draws the yichud yudke, the union of yud and k. There should be a yichud eshlim, a total, a complete union. Like we learned earlier, the yichud is like the yichud of arich ampin and chochma bina and zohar malchus. So it's a complete union that creates that. It's the higher level of a union, like a zivug eshlim, that is not just to sustain existence, but to draw down higher new energies, souls, like he said, to give birth to souls. We learned that in the previous page. Ad kan dvarav. That's the Emek HaMelech. We're going to stop here. And from here, he's going to now explain what this means in Avodah. Now that we know this level of who, so who, Bezdine, the level of who is this level of Arich through Binah that you're drawing it down. Okay. So clearly he's going to talk now about how Binah, which is a Hizbonenus, to the point of Nafshecho that allows us to contemplate and access not just the divine within existence, but the divine beyond existence. Just keep that in mind. That's going to be the key discussion now. How Binah allows that to happen, and that's his bonus, our contemplation that draws from that higher level, ultimately of Ishin Einoi. Yeah.
Rabbi Jacobson.
Let's go 1 second. That's going to be the discussion for a while, and then to page 1425, we're going to conclude that whole topic. Okay, got it. Yeah, we'll stop here, close to the bottom of page 1411. Yes, go ahead.
One of the practical applications of this isn't this the same concept that they say that the parnasa of a guy, of a husband, is in the merit of his wife. So in a sense, the wife being the Binah, and that's the mazalot that she opens up for the Chochma Stima'ah, for the Shefa to come down. Would this be one of those applications of, like, real life application of this concept?
I'm not sure. It's an interesting correlation. Being that he doesn't say it explicitly, I would have to see if other Maimorim say what you're saying right now. I'm not saying it's incorrect, but as often you bring something from a different subject matter, I can't say if it's exactly this level or not. Can you use that to explain this? Perhaps. But I'm more careful, because unless I see it, then it's more our own type of application. So that's all. I'm not saying it's wrong, but
okay.
Very possible. Okay?
Thank you.
Where it says based, Heim Ayin Sanhedrish Behechel Sechus. Is that, you just mentioned, I think that you said it was in Midos. Is that Zion Midos or the Sanhedrin? Where's the Sanhedrin in this? In
Well,
Binah?
he said before, the 70 Sanhedrin is 77 times 10. He said on the previous page that is the Zion Midas, encompassing Kol Echad Klulam Eser. Look at middle of page 1410.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they're called the 7 eyes, 7 times 10. So that is the Midas, yes.
But wouldn't
or Chochma Sheba Midas, Meichen Sheba Midas.
Oh, that's it. Oh, okay. Now I understand. Because normally you would think of Sanhedrin as Chochma and Binah and Das, right? You're not.
So he goes on. He says Meichen Sheba Midas, but yes, but it's Chabad. It's Meichen, but as a Sanhedrin, it's ruling and governing. It's not just sitting and studying Torah. Moshe is a level of Chochma itself, learning Torah and connecting to God. Here we're talking about applying Torah to halacha.
Right.
So it's like what we learned about Mishnah. It's a very application of Torah to the Midas.
Gotcha.
Isser, Heter, Chesed, Gvura, and so on.
So it's Chochma Binah Das of the Midas.
He doesn't say Chacham bin Das. He says Meichen Sheba Midas, to be exact. That's the words that he uses. Meichen Sheba Midas.
Okay.
So on the previous page, And also go to page 1401. He talks about it as well. Okay. So let's so we're stopping here, close to the bottom of page